Productions returns with a very special episode because after you've been away for a while, you have to do something to get attention. I'm here with David Auerbach, writer and software engineer. A lot of you guys who watch this channel are no stranger to David's writing, and we're talking the Trump dossiers today, most specifically the context surrounding the Trump dossiers. So David, I'm just going to rip the Band-Aid right off, get right into it, dispense with the small talk. What are these documents and what's in them?
So the document that and by which I mean the document that everyone's seen, because there are other documents floating around, is the one that Buzzfeed published a bit over a week ago, which was a dossier that contains opposition research on Donald Trump, and it claims, among other things, that the FSB, which is the modern day KGB, has compromising material on Trump. Some of the compromising material is pretty colorful. It accuses them of having the Trump campaign of having improper financial connections to Russia, and it also says that they have also had improper political contacts. Basically, that that Russia is to some extent or another running Trump or has some leverage over him. Now there's question over when BuzzFeed published it. Okay, where did it come from? And it was not. Nobody knew for a while. The current thought is that the currently accepted version is that an ex-intelligence official named Christopher Steele, who was with MI6, which is sort of the British CIA in the 1990s, had been commissioned by anti-Trump Republican campaign officials in the first half of 2016 to collect opposition research on Trump, specifically regarding Russia, but I mean anything. And that after the end of the primary, he was then employed by Democratic officials to continue that work. So the dossier consists of a series of memos that date back at least as early as August of 2016, although I believe the earliest memo is dated either June or July. And the FBI had obtained them sometime around August, before even the media knew about it, when apparently Steele gave them to an FBI official. Now, assuming that Steele is the person, more reports were presented. In general, the later ones contain more inflammatory allegations, and they were eventually ended up in John McCain's hands, who in December gave them to the FBI. The FBI was already aware of them. And after that, it seems like everything was behind the scenes, but the collective American intelligence agencies, which is the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI, CIA, and NSA, made enough of a note of the dossier and the information in it to at least include a summary of it in their briefing a couple weeks ago, in their intelligence briefings to Obama a couple weeks ago. Now, what does that say about the veracity of and credibility of what's in the documents? Not a lot. I think that my position is that it certainly can't be just dismissed out of hand, but at the same time, there's no, we don't have confirmation, certainly, of the most inflammatory claims of them, and there are a lot of inflammatory claims. So we are in this sort of informational limbo right now, where you have this document floating around. Steele apparently has disappeared off the face of the planet and gone into hiding. That also doesn't necessarily seem to prove one thing or the other, since it would
Right.
seem like a good idea to disappear off the face of the planet, regardless of whether the thing was true. We don't even know what degree of veracity Steele himself assigned to the documents, because he was employed by people who wanted negative information on Trump. He was being contracted to do a job, and certainly he gave them what they wanted to hear. At the same time, it's not. I mean, it, at the same time, we don't have evidence that he was necessarily being disingenuous. He may just have, but neither do we know that this information was firsthand or reliable. It's a collection of things he heard from intelligence sources that were reliable purely based on his reputation, presumably.
Right.
And that's why, everything is so up in the air now, that you have these allegations. They at least seem potential. They're not ridiculous like the ones that 4chan faked.
Right.
You have Donald Trump sitting down with like a giant hentai doll. Yes, that's going to raise your alarm right now. But certainly it was something that that it appears American intelligence, not necessarily known for their perfect judgment either, but at least thought was worth noting. So saying, "Oh, this is absolutely no big deal and who cares," I think is not warranted. But neither is it fair to say, "Oh, okay, this is proof of something or other." It basically just opens up a set of unpleasant possibilities that we're waiting for more information on, and that we have very little information, very, very incomplete information about.
Now, the nature of opposition research is it doesn't matter if it's true as long as it's damaging, correct?
Well, I mean, because this was an intelligence officer, this wasn't like sort of a muckraker or a campaign official. Steele presumably went into this, tasked with finding stuff that was true, such that it could be maybe made use of, to one extent or another. That doesn't make it true, but certainly, the document is pretty. It could go way more overboard if it was just a matter of creating rumors that might be believed. I mean, my assessment from having read, at least some amount of intelligence documents over the years, is that it reads competently. It was put together by someone competent, and people who knew Steele and people who were associated with him say that he is respected. And someone else said it's somewhat credible. What does that mean? Who knows? But I don't think I don't think that one can just say Steele, that the thing is completely a hit job. What it might be closer to potentially is, okay, well, I've collected the most damaging information that has some degree of sourcing or whatever attached to it, and here you go. So it doesn't meet some high bar for, okay, this is things that you can actually believe about Trump. Neither is it stuff that I just made up in my head the other night, though.
Right.
And neither is it stuff that I got off of Pulp. It has some. It's from a network that traffics in information, but traffics in information that sometimes turns out to be true.
Right. So they're not wrong all the time, essentially.
No, right. So there exists some possibility, and I'm not saying it's a large possibility. I'm just saying it's a possibility that some of these things are true. Things that are, I think, that, and it wouldn't be such a big deal if it weren't being reinforced by the fact that Trump has his nose so far up Putin's rear that you really have to wonder what he's thinking. I mean, if Trump were saying this dossier is ridiculous and Putin is the greatest evil on the planet, well, that certainly would discredit the dossier. It's only because you have sort of all this sort of circumstantial evidence surrounding that it increases people's suspicions that, okay, what is the explanation for Trump's bizarre sudden détente with Putin and his seeming wish to dismantle NATO, which would be gigantic and enormous. Likewise, you're getting reports saying that Israel's intelligence agencies are thinking of not sharing their intelligence with the Trump administration, and that this now applies to Britain as well. if those reports are true, that's insane. I mean, that would be, such an upheaval of, you know, alliances and geopolitics that, I mean, I can't even imagine. But it does mean that at least, it doesn't really matter whether I take it seriously, but the mere fact that it's being taken seriously by important people makes this of consequence, even if it turns out to be false. So now the story has become the story, as you might say, even if the
Now,
story was fake.
this whole scandal has happened on the backdrop of a discussion of what is newsworthy and is a document dump, which is essentially what BuzzFeed did, actual reporting. And do you think that the whole background of Russia and Trump's weird bromance with Putin upped the newsworthiness of this story, or is that just an excuse BuzzFeed used to dump something they knew was going to get a ton of clicks?
I mean,
Both?
both
Yeah.
perhaps. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that the state of news journalism is so dire that no one has pure motives in doing anything.
Mm-hmm.
And um, of course BuzzFeed published it, because it would get clicks. They could well have published it, out of a desire to harm Trump as well. Whether it breaks some ethical law, I mean, yeah, maybe it's a question I almost feel is sort of irrelevant given that, people are talking about, well, Trump's breaking all the norms. Well, it's like, okay, well, if it's a norm breaking year, I guess BuzzFeed's breaking them too. But I feel like, I mean, yeah, it's an issue. It's not on my top 10 list of issues that concern me right now. It's out there now, and something was going to come out anyway, sooner or later.
Mm-hmm.
And the story is of sufficient importance, at least if it's true. I mean, well, Matt Taibbi said this, and I think that this is probably the best summation I've read, which is we still have no clear clue what we're dealing with. We're either learning
Mm-hmm.
the outlines of the most extraordinary compromise to date of an incoming American president by a foreign power, or we're watching an unparalleled libel and media overreach. And the thing is that either both of those options are just so out of bounds as far as traditional political discourse goes that people that there's really no sort of I don't think there's any conclusions to be drawn until we're looking back in retrospect saying, oh, okay, whatever. If it turns out to be true, BuzzFeed's going to look a lot better than if it turns out to be false. So I guess I feel like, why should I take a position on that now when the judgment will clearly be made depending on whether the dossier was true or false, even if BuzzFeed had no idea.
And
So
that, I mean, that is BuzzFeed's defense, that we know more now than we did a week ago because they dumped the documents. Is that, I mean, there is some validity to that, but then we have this other thing with Trump calling CNN fake news because of things BuzzFeed reported. Now, this is, and I hate slippery slope arguments. I hate going down that road, but this isn't at this point a slippery slope argument. Trump calls something fake news. It's not fake news as far as anybody can tell. This dossier does exist, correct? It's not some figment of someone's imagination that they then manufactured.
I mean, um, I guess my sense there is Trump was going to find some way to bully CNN one way or the other.
Okay.
So, I mean, yeah, this is a particularly juicy use, and I mean, it's especially amusing because fake news was a media narrative ginned up in
Mm-hmm.
the wake of Clinton's loss, so which I always thought was dumb. And well, so there you go. Yeah, it's like, well, what's fake news? It's a very vague term. Well, Trump is really great at applying vague terms and hitting people over the head with them. So, I mean, the media is at what is that? What was that statistic? Like 15% trust nationwide.
14,
They
I
don't,
believe.
right. They
Yeah.
don't have a lot. They ain't got far down to go. So,
And that makes me think, how did we get there? As somebody that does still, I'm old fashioned, I still triple source my stuff. Part of the reason I sort of identify as an analyst now instead of a journalist is, in video games, it's almost impossible to do actual journalism other than, one-to-one conversations like this and just, well,
Yeah,
this is the person's opinion, sort of the Rubin Report model.
right.
But why did the media become so untrustworthy? I mean, it's not just public opinion. There's got to be something at the root of that incredible distrust.
I mean, that's a long story and perhaps is a bit far afield for the
Okay.
Dossier. I don't know if I can actually sum that up in a sentence or
Just
two.
too many mistakes without enough amends to make mistakes is essentially the short answer.
I mean, for me, it was certainly the Iraq War. That was very
Okay.
formative. That seeing the media jump on board with Bush and his cronies for the biggest foreign policy mistake, arguably in American history, was tremendously dismaying, and it made me think, okay, look, this is awful. Um, but that's me. I'm not going to say that that's certainly the cause in general. But um, the, the the shifts brought about by social media have also changed monetary incentives for the generation of news and content. And I wrote about this a bit in an interview I did with New York Magazine, which
Mm-hmm.
a decent probably is decent summation of my opinions on the state of media today. But you know, if you want to look at it from a purely economic standpoint, is that you know, these companies are in it to make money, and good journalism is never going to be the best way to make money.
Because
So,
it's expensive, it takes a
right.
long time, and it's resource heavy.
But the things that do make money are going to tend to create distrust over the years.
Right, right.
Um,
Now, jumping over to the 4chan thing, what was that document? What happened there? Because there are people who believe that the document the FBI presented to Obama and Trump was a 4chan fake.
Yeah, there's no evidence of that whatsoever.
Okay.
The most they have is some guy claiming that he passed something to a radio host who said that he passed something to the FBI, but there's no genetic link that shows that it was ever the same material or that it ever got past, that
I
it ever
saw
got
one with
past the first.
Evan McMullen tied into it. I was like, how did Evan McMullen get dragged into this? Because he was was he former CIA?
I thought it was military. I don't
Maybe
know. I mean,
FBI. Anyway, a third party candidate in Utah somehow got a forgery into the US government. This seems like
what I said to, people even asked me about it. I said, look, show me something that shows that it was the same material. And no
right.
one ever did. And I said, look, if it was the same material, I suspect we would know that by now because someone would have produced the document.
And US intelligence makes mistakes, but they're not that inept, are they?
Oh, I think it could happen. I just don't
Okay.
think it happened this time.
Okay.
I think it could happen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to rule out. I'm not going to rule out anything. I mean, the FBI's. This is if you look at the document on the Russian hack that was put out a week before this one, it's atrocious. It basically is a bunch of safeguards. So
Mm-hmm.
there's huge numbers of incompetence there, and I'm not going to put it past any intelligence agency that they take something and make it into that they take a prank and make it into a serious threat. However, what's being claimed in this case, which is that 4chan generated part or all of that dossier, there's no evidence to suggest that. And indeed, I believe the quality of the dossier is way higher than 4chan could ever muster.
Right. Oh, 4chan.
It
You
doesn't
give
help
us
when you claim authorship of the dossier and you can barely spell. So.
Yeah, well, that was the reason that a lot of people said, well, it's clearly fake. It just wasn't actually the dossier Buzzfeed published.
Oh, that part. Oh, right. Well, then,
Yeah.
yeah, then they created this like fake little like photo of something that was 0.41 in the dossier when the dossier only has 16 points and said, oh, look at this. And then, that was clearly an attempt to, seed disinformation as well. And obviously, look how long that lasted. It didn't last very long. So.
Well, and I've seen private contractor reports for security, both, information and, just private contractor for personal security. There's misspellings in them all the time.
Right.
They're generated exceptionally quickly. So
Mhm.
that didn't sort of I
Oh,
disagree that this is an indication that it's fake, that there's a
oh,
couple
I
of
don't mean
typos
that.
in
I
it.
mean the person who posted on 4chan saying I wrote the dossier
Oh, okay.
really seemed barely literate,
Yeah.
and the person
Yeah.
who wrote the dossier is clearly literate.
Now,
So
do you think it's possible there are some Russian meddling in those anonymous groups? I mean, that seems like the first place I'd hit if I wanted to stir up some trouble.
I, I don't know. I
Yeah.
mean, it seems. I mean, it's certainly. I mean, it's possible. It seems like Russia's doing just fine in terms of meddling,
Right.
even if they aren't doing that. I mean, they're creating a lot of chaos, and I think that there is, for people who sort of are knitted into the internet community, I think there's sort of a bias to attribute to a lot of online discourse more importance and significance than it actually has. Like, I think the entire sort of mythology around the alt-right is somewhat blinkered. That it wasn't the alt-right that got Trump elected. It was the same people who've been voting Republican for the last 20 years or so. The
Plus coal
alt-right.
miners in the Rust Belt.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
right. Plus a couple more. But yeah, I mean but eventually it turned out that, even like middle class, college educated Republicans ended up voting for Trump. So, it's just, I think there's this urge to sort of stress the discontinuity and suddenness of Trump, when in actuality Trump sort of represents an advance, but not it doesn't represent a political process that has suddenly upended itself. We were not some great democracy 10 years ago that has suddenly been violated by the presence of the alt-right and Trump.
Right.
Things have
Right.
gone in this direction for a long time. So I mean, uh, so so people, and I mean, I think that extends to even to Russia, the claims of, okay, Russian interference in the election. Well, yes, okay, we can say that Russia has interfered in all elections.
Sure.
They clearly interfered more this time, but it's not the fact of the interference that is the deepest problem here. It's the fact that Trump may actually have some quid pro quo with that interference
Right.
that would be really dangerous. And that's why I think, that's what really is a cause for concern. If Russia had gotten Trump elected and Trump was now like, telling Putin that his hands were bigger than Putin's hands, okay, we would say like, okay, whatever.
Yeah.
It's just because Trump been has been such a supplicant and such a toady to Putin that it seems bizarre and surreal, because it seems like, okay, why are you acting like we're a client state to
Right.
Trump? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Now, there's actually someone who said, there's actually, this is in the dossier, and it said
Mhm.
that the Trump campaign likes having Russia as a boogeyman because it obscures Trump's corruption with China and other developing countries. And so there's even this theory in the actual
Wow.
dossier promoting that the whole Russia thing is a false flag to generate smoke where there's no fire, and distract from Trump's real conflicts and corruption. So you never
Because
know,
we know China holds a lot of his debt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and coincidentally, Russians are also terrified of China.
Right. Now, that being said, spying on a businessman going over to Russia to do a beauty pageant is not outside the realm of what Russia does. I mean, I have some sources that were involved in the debriefing of Canadian dignitaries during the Sochi Games, because if in doubt, your room's bugged.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah. I have no difficulty believing that they have information on him. What the information is, we don't know, but
Right.
certainly, when you go there, unless you are like in a bubble something. And at that time, his presidential campaign was just a speck in his eye. So I'm sure that they documented his travels very, very carefully. The dossier said they'd been tracking him for at least 5 and arguably 8 years. And sure, I mean, it's very easy to track people,
Yeah, yeah.
in today's big data world. Now, does that mean that that there's footage of him hiring two prostitutes to urinate on a bed? I don't know. It just means that they know what he did, whatever it was.
My question is even if they had that, why would it even matter? Like, I know my first reaction, and I'm certainly not normal. I'm not the average
Mhm.
American voter, but I thought, who cares if he got girls to pee on each other, or who
Just on
cares
the
if he
bed.
watches hentai? Yeah, but who cares? I mean, that's my big question. I care about financial entanglements. I care about something that actually would impact his behavior. After the Access Hollywood tape with, grab her by the so and so, I can't see paying Russian prostitutes to pee on a bed as being something that's actually damaging. Am I way off base here?
I don't know. I mean, maybe that was the worst thing they got on him. I don't know. I mean, at this point, it's purely, that's the thing. It's like that was, I mean, and that actually made me think, okay, I'm not going to dismiss this out of hand because, yeah, if Steele is just fabricating stuff, he could have fabricated something worse, that would have still been believable. The real dangerous things in here are less that than the accusations that the Trump campaign was having contacts with Russia and were the sanctions and that there were secret trips to Prague to coordinate all of that stuff. And that stuff is pretty bad news. But at the same time, the urine story is pretty salacious. So
Right. It gets people
so
talking. I mean, I
yeah.
cracked a few jokes myself, but I told jokes because to me, it really doesn't matter. Pivoting to something that does matter, in your opinion, what are the odds that this actually was a government leak? And by way of this wasn't a classified document, correct? So if it
Wait, a
was
government
released,
that the dossier was leaked by the government?
yes.
Which part of the government?
That's my question is, the Trump campaign and the Republican Party's talking point now is that this is a huge failing of intelligence. They leaked classified information. Someone should be prosecuted for this outrage. And
Yeah,
meanwhile, the press has had portions of this information since before the election.
right. Right. So presumably, yeah, so presumably this information was already in circulation. That sounds like noise being generated. And certainly Trump is in a huge feud with at least large segments of the intelligence community. And you've got Brennan like writing a very unusual note of exception to him.
Mm.
You've got Clapper basically trying to apologize to Trump and make things up to him because Clapper, I guess, wants to keep his job or something. Um, um, and yeah, Trump is certainly marshaling whatever he can to sort of get one up on the intelligence agency, and that's, I think, the weirdest thing that have you ever seen a president go up against the intelligence agencies even before he's in office, much less once he's in office, and what consequences does that have? And I mean, the way I see it is, okay, we're going to see just how deep the deep state goes, like how well can they defend themselves from an executive who seems to have declared war on them and wants to, there's already, I think, talk of completely revamping the CIA and like sending agents out in the field and perhaps gutting their internal capabilities. And I say this as someone who's not exactly a fan of the CIA. It's just that, this is an interesting turf war. And unfortunately, because of the nature of these things, you're not going to know any of what's happening until for years, if not
Right.
decades, because, it's going to be like a John le Carre novel, except with Bozo the Clown as the main character. So,
But
so
how does this benefit him at all? This just seems like a lose-lose for Trump. What could possibly be the motivations for picking this very unlikely fight?
well, I mean, a lot. I mean, a lot of the deep state, by which I mean parts of the CIA,
Hmm.
parts of the FBI, although at least part of the FBI seems more sympathetic to Trump, but accounts seem to be conflicted. The NSA, all these people have took very public stances against Trump. Not completely, but certainly you've never seen the intelligence community sort of endorse, or not, or de-endorse a candidate like you'd seen them go against Trump. That they really didn't. It seemed very clear when you had like 140 ex-intelligence officials sign it, that everybody was getting on board the please, please, please don't elect Trump campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So that conflict was seeded. So Trump is someone who sees the world in very manichaeistic terms. He's got friends and enemies. The CIA is definitely his enemy at this point, as are a lot of the other portions of intelligence. This certainly acts to get him leverage. If he can actually sort of make the story stick that, oh, the CIA is just out to get him, that gives him more leverage for reforming them, for installing his people there. It seems like some of his folks, like Michael Flynn, also would like to reform that. Certainly Steve Bannon does, but I don't know how much Bannon's input counts at this point. But he's in the same way that he uses sort of bludgeoning rhetoric to get the upper hand over his opponents, like in the primary, and over Hillary Clinton, and over like Republicans in Congress as well. He's going to try to do that to the CIA now too. That's his hammer for every nail. Now it's going to be interesting to see how it works, since it's a bit of a different opponent here. He's not like opposing sort of one person or group of people, but an institution that is capable of certain devious means, and certainly they are involved in talks. It seems that the intelligence communities are talking off the record to the Washington Post and the New York Times, because you see things attributed to them anonymously. So there's that level of it, and I'm sure Trump doesn't like that.
CNN outed Kellyanne Conway as an election anonymous source the other
Sure,
night.
yeah, exactly.
I was stunned. Carl Bernstein, of all people, outed a source on CNN. These are the times we live in. And so it seems like everybody's doing it. Like, this seems like the new normal now, that we know the FBI is leaky. That's apparently one of the reasons that Comey took the crazy step he did, because he was afraid of leaks. We know government has always been leaky. Senators and congressmen kick things to Politico, kick things to Buzzfeed all the time. So my question is, how much of this modern outrage at the practice is just basically the same tactics Trump uses to sell ties and condos, and how much of it is actually legitimate concern that we should be paying attention to?
About leaking?
Yeah, about the sort of sanctity of, intelligence being a closed loop that I think we'd all like to think is true, but in my understanding never really has been.
Yeah, it's again one of those cases of it's okay when I do it, but not when you do it.
Going back to Hoover, there were leaks.
Right. Yeah. Well, and tons and tons of leaks were made to support the Iraq War,
Right.
that were from the government. So it's not as though it's a time-honored practice. The situation and the stakes are very different now, simply because Trump is such an outsider to some of these cliques. He doesn't, and I think honestly, I think that may in the end doom him, because my sense is that there are not a lot of people in DC who actually want Donald Trump to be president. So many of them may have chosen him over Clinton, but I don't think I think there are a lot of people who would rather have Mike Pence than Donald Trump, and I think that could come back to bite him.
Well, this is kind of a stupid question, but what are the odds that Mike Pence is a Kevin Spacey type character from House of Cards? He's going to become a non-elected president through some Machiavellian backdoor deals.
Well, isn't he already an elected vice president? And given Trump's lack of interest in doing most of anything, it seems like he has a great deal of power already.
So you think it's another Cheney?
I think, certainly, there are reports that Trump is already bored as hell with like the everyday business of the presidency. So, and that certainly fits his personality. He was the guy who said, "Oh, maybe I won't even become president."
Even Obama seems bored at this point, is the thing. He's acting like a guy who was done months ago. Is it just an inhumanly difficult job, and we can expect this from anybody. I'm trying to be a little bit fair to Donald
I think
Trump
Obama
here.
is depressed because his legacy has just been ruined. I think he's just in a catastrophic depression, and he feels like,
Okay.
what have I done, or what have we done? And I suspect that Obama's not exactly the most hot-tempered person, but I suspect that he is about as enraged as at Hillary Clinton as he has ever been at anyone in his life, based on his actual public criticism of her in December. He gave an interview to the Washington Post where he said where he criticized her and sort
Yeah.
of said in very nice terms that she'd blown it. And like coming from Obama, that's like
I
that's
was
like calling her
surprised. I
like the rudest words you could imagine. So
Well,
so,
there's been a
so
few of these things lately, though. I think you're right. This is as much emotion as we're gonna see from him. The not vetoing the UN thing against Israel. These are all very
yeah.
emotional decisions.
Yeah, so I mean, but to get back to the
I mean, is this some sort of Trump contagion even on Obama? Are we dealing with a president who, just by sheer force of personality and salesman manipulation, like Arthur Miller style, can he is there a certain thought contagion going on here that everyone's behaving crazy because no one knows where this guy's coming from?
well, I mean, yes, I think so. I would put it a little differently in that, Trump is so reactive that he's not, I don't think he's acting with any particular strategy except to just like, promote himself as the greatest guy on earth. I mean, he says, "Oh, I've got a healthcare plan. Everyone will be insured." He didn't think about that. He just said
Right.
it. So he generates this colossal amount of noise, and we have all these systems set up that react to it. The media reacts to it in astonishingly, you know, astonishingly
Well, they always take the
like
bait. They
instinct.
always
Yeah,
take the
it's
bait.
always instinctual.
Yes.
So basically, he's playing these systems for all he can. The question is, what's going to happen to the other somewhat quieter systems, like, for example, the intelligence services, like Congress, even, as sort of he continues to act in these strange, as he continues to act in unpredictable ways. And a lot of that is also conditioned on what the hell is his relationship to Russia, which we still don't know.
Now,
Turns out to be
last question. What does this mean in real terms for the average person just wanting a job and wanting to, keep their families under a roof and fed, and all those sort of pocketbook Main Street issues that, all this other noise aside, decided the election? What does this instability, what does Trump's confrontational style mean for the average person?
Well, it's probably not going to make America great again, is my suspicion. I mean, I'm amazed at people who, were so skeptical, rightly so, about, Clinton and Obama. Some of them being so absolutely credulous before baseless promises from Trump. But
Mm-hmm.
that's the way that it goes.
Do you think Obama couldn't get an agenda through? Do you think Trump can get his through because it defies Republican orthodoxy?
What agenda?
Okay, the wall, the tariff
Well,
on imported goods, these are not. The wall is a Republican thing. Tariffs are not. Can he make that happen?
does he want to make it happen? Someone would need to. I'm not sure what he wants to do. Um, well, I mean, he wants to get rid of Obamacare, so I mean, uh, he can probably get at least some steps towards that goal. Um, but I mean, I don't see a lot of progress or planning on any of these other issues at this point.
So do
So,
you think he's just a rubber stamp for Republicans to push their agenda through?
um, I don't know. He's not a rubber stamp, but
Okay.
I think it's going to be very hard to predict because he can veto. It's just he's certainly going to be able to stop stuff from happening, but in terms of making stuff happen, I have I I assume most of what he's going to do is going to be through the executive branch, because Congress, you're not going to be able to get 60 votes in the Senate for very much.
Right.
What he does with the executive branch, I mean, I assume it's going to be a lot of crony capitalism. It's going to be a lot of payoffs. When he talks about like the one even vaguely concrete policy plan I've seen from him is the so-called stimulus, which basically looks like a handout to a bunch of his buddies. And that, yeah, you could probably do that. But I mean, anything big, I mean, I just, the big things are going to be in the realm of foreign policy, and I have no idea what to expect there for all the obvious reasons that we've been discussing. That, is he actually going to break up NATO? I have no clue. There's going to be a lot of inertia against that, but who knows? I mean, I've tried to be humbled by the fact that I bought into the sense that I didn't think Trump was going to win, and boy, was I wrong. So, I'm trying to play it safe now and say that I have no clue other than I don't think good times are ahead of us for sure. I'm pretty sure of that. I mean, there's also the issue, also the issue of okay, you can have unpredicted results. What if there is some sort of major terrorist attack? Well, God help us all. I don't know.
We said that about Bush.
I'll say this. This is a gut feeling, so I make absolutely no. I can't rationalize this, but I do have a gut feeling that Trump ain't going to make it through 4 years, one way or another. That he will not be in office come 2021.
I've heard that from a lot of people.
It's just you can only remain unstable for so long before something upends it.
Well, before the system, inflicts stability on itself. The U.S. system is designed to lock up when things get chaotic, and that
so much of it already is locked up.
Yeah.
So,
but that's the way the system is designed to work. I mean, I think that a lot of the sky is falling stuff misses the fact that this is what the particular, three branches of government, that's what it's designed to do.
Yeah, actually, can I read it? Can I read a good passage?
Yeah, this will be a good way to wrap. Yeah, quote. Yay.
First, I need to find the book. It's from a.
Do jazz hands.
It's worth reading, called "The Confidence Trap," and it's right here. I can endorse this book.
There we go.
It's Confidence Trap, A History of Democracy in Crisis from World War I to the Present, which is sort of a misleading title because his thesis is that democracy is always in crisis.
By its very nature, of course.
Yes. He says, let's see. The thesis is that the problem for American democracy is that our confidence that we can make reparable mistakes comes very close to the idea that our mistakes don't really matter. So
that's a reassuring thought.
We're prone to get stuck in a childish state of mind because we think nothing really bad ever happens. So basically, we're tempted. We exist in this sort of permanent state of trauma and crisis because democracy is sufficiently unstable to keep sort of producing mini crises, of which Trump is certainly one.
I was going to say, this is making Trump sound like the ideal guy for this job right now.
And yet we recover for we tend to recover from them better than non-democracies do, where an autocracy tends to be more brittle and tends to be actually wiped out by crises, but democracy seems to weather them underneath. I mean, it's better, even though we're sort of in a permanent state of like running around with our heads cut off above it. The problem is that this happens, we weather it until we don't. So we never get better at handling crises. We just keep
stumbling from one to the next,
and we just keep never dying from them. Yeah. So I don't know. So is this going to be the last one? Probably not, but who knows?
But that's fairly optimistic, so it's a good place to stop. David, thank you so much for your time. Anything you want to plug while you're here?
Well, God, no. I mean, if Actually, if anyone's interested, I have a tiny letter newsletter that's linked at the top of my Twitter feed, and I send out updates there. So if you want to follow my work, just sign up there, and I'll
I will
send
link to
out
that.
whatever. Yeah.
And maybe
Because
we'll have you back on when your upcoming project gets released.
yeah, that would be, yeah, hopefully it won't be too long. Yeah, I spent the last year or so writing a book about technology and also a bit about my life in it, and I just turned in the manuscript, so hopefully.
And I can't wait. I can't wait. So if David seems very fatalistic, guys, it's because he just turned in a manuscript. We all get that way. Everything sucks and I
Yeah,
want to drink. Yeah.
well, I mean, this is a paraphrase, like, this is what Francois Truffaut said. It's like, when I start at the start of filming, I want to make a great movie. At the end of filming, I just want to make a
I
movie, and
want
that's
to
pretty much
finish
how you
the
feel
damn
about writing a
thing.
book. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. David, thanks
Anyway,
so much for your
thanks for
time.
having me on, Leon.